Dr. Phil had seen everything in 25 years. Every confession, every breakdown, every revelation. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, when a guest pulled out a faded photograph from her purse, he did something he'd never done before. He stopped mid-sentence, walked to the edge of the stage, and said 5 words that made the entire studio hold its breath. "Stop the tape. Right now." What was in that photograph would change 2 lives forever. 48 hours earlier, the Dr. Phil show had received 2 separate applications. The first came from Sarah Mitchell, a 42-year-old teacher from Ohio who wrote, "I need help forgiving the drunk driver who killed my daughter 15 years ago." The second came from Michael Torres, a 45-year-old construction worker from Texas. "I've been sober for 10 years, but I can't forgive myself for something I did when I was drinking." The producers, following standard protocol, scheduled them for different episodes. Sarah was booked for Tuesday, Michael for Thursday. They had never met. They lived in different states. Their stories seemed completely unrelated. But fate had other plans. On Monday night, Michael's flight to Los Angeles was cancelled due to weather. The airline rebooked him for Tuesday morning, the same day as Sarah's taping. When he arrived at the studio, a production assistant made a mistake. She directed him to the green room where Sarah was waiting, instead of the holding area for Thursday's guests. "Sorry about that," the assistant said quickly, realizing her error. "Let me take you to the right room." But Michael had already sat down. And Sarah, nervous about her upcoming appearance, had started making small talk. "First time on the show?" she asked. "Yeah," Michael replied. "You?" "Same. I'm terrified." They talked for 7 minutes before the assistant returned to move Michael. 7 minutes of casual conversation about nothing important. Weather. Traffic. The complimentary snacks in the green room. 7 minutes that would soon become the most important 7 minutes of their lives. Sarah's segment began as planned. Dr. Phil welcomed her to the stage, and she sat in the guest chair with her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Sarah, thank you for being here," Dr. Phil said in that distinctive voice that had counseled thousands. "Tell us why you reached out to the show." Sarah took a shaky breath. 15 years ago, my daughter Emma was killed by a drunk driver. She was only 7 years old. We were at a crosswalk. The light was green for us. And this car just came out of nowhere. The studio audience was silent. Dr. Phil leaned forward, giving her his complete attention, that famous focus that made guests feel like they were the only person in the world. The driver ran. He left the scene. They never found him. Never found him, Dr. Phil repeated quietly. Never. And for 15 years, I've carried this anger. This hatred. I know it's destroying me. My therapist says I need to find a way to forgive, even though I don't know who to forgive. But I don't know how. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. Sarah, I want to show you something, Dr. Phil said. Our team did some research after you contacted us. We found newspaper articles about the accident. There was a witness who came forward months later. They got a partial license plate. Sarah's eyes widened. I never knew that. The police investigated, but the trail went cold. The car was registered to someone who reported it stolen that same week. Dr. Phil pulled out a folder. But our investigative team kept digging. And Sarah, we may have found something. The audience leaned forward collectively. This wasn't in the show's usual format. Dr. Phil was going off script. Before I tell you what we found, I need to ask you something. If you could speak to the person responsible, if they were sitting right in front of you, what would you want to say? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I'd want to know why. Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you at least call for help? She might have. Her voice broke. She might have survived if someone had called 911 immediately. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. Then he did something unprecedented. He turned to the cameras and said, Stop the tape. The red lights on the cameras blinked off. Producers in the control room froze. In 25 years, Dr. Phil had never stopped a taping like this. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah, stay with me here, Dr. Phil said, his voice dropping to a tone the microphones barely caught. I need to bring someone out. And I need you to trust me. Sarah nodded, confused and frightened. Dr. Phil turned to his producer in the wings. Bring Michael Torres out here. Now. The producer's face went pale. Dr. Phil, he's scheduled for Thursday. He doesn't know anything about. I know exactly what I'm doing. Bring him out. 2 minutes later, Michael walked onto the stage, completely bewildered. He'd been in his holding room when a producer rushed in and said Dr. Phil needed him immediately. Michael, Dr. Phil said, I need you to sit down. Right there. He pointed to the chair next to Sarah. Michael sat, glancing nervously at Sarah, who stared at him with equal confusion. Michael, you're here because you told us you can't forgive yourself for something you did while drinking. Something that happened 15 years ago. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Tell us what happened. Michael's hands were shaking. I was driving drunk. I hit someone. A child. I panicked and I ran. I was scared and stupid and drunk, and I ran. I reported my car stolen the next day and I lied to the police. I've been carrying this guilt ever since. Even after I got sober, even after I turned my life around, I can't forgive myself for what I did to that family. Sarah's face had gone completely white. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. Dr. Phil looked between them. Sarah, can you tell me what year your daughter was killed? 2009, June 3rd, 2009. Dr. Phil turned to Michael. And when did your accident happen? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. June 3rd, 2009. The studio was so silent you could hear the air conditioning humming. Sarah slowly turned her head to look at Michael. Their eyes met for the first time with understanding. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. Sarah, Dr. Phil said gently, you said you were at a crosswalk? Corner of 5th and Madison in Columbus, Ohio. Is that right? Yes, she whispered. Michael, where did your accident happen? Michael's face crumpled. 5th and Madison. Columbus, Ohio. Sarah made a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a gasp. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. Michael stood too, tears streaming down his face. I am so sorry, Michael said, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. There hasn't been a single day, not one day, that I haven't thought about that little girl. About what I took from her. From her family. I would give anything to take it back. Dr. Phil stepped between them, not as a barrier, but as a guide. Sarah, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. But you're here because you wanted to find a way to forgive. And Michael is here because he needs to be forgiven. I don't believe in coincidences. Sarah was sobbing now. The audience was crying. Even the camera operators had tears running down their faces. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Sarah reached into her purse with trembling hands. She pulled out an old photograph, the one she'd brought for the taping. It showed a little girl with blonde pigtails, wearing a yellow dress, holding an ice cream cone and grinning at the camera. This is Emma, Sarah said, her voice shaking. This is my daughter. The daughter you killed. She held the photograph toward Michael. He looked at it, and his knees buckled. Dr. Phil caught him and helped him stay standing. I see her every night in my dreams. Michael whispered. That yellow dress. I see it every night. Sarah stepped closer. She was still holding the photograph. And then she did something that would be replayed millions of times. She took Michael's hand and placed the photograph in it. Keep it, she said. Keep it and remember her. Remember Emma Grace Mitchell. Remember that she loved strawberry ice cream and Disney movies and dancing in the rain. Don't just remember the worst moment. Remember the life that was there. Michael collapsed into the guest chair, clutching the photograph, his whole body shaking with sobs. Dr. Phil knelt beside him. "Michael, look at me. Look at me." He waited until Michael met his eyes. "You've been sober for 10 years. You've helped other people get sober. You've volunteered at substance abuse centers. You've tried to make amends in every way you knew how. But you couldn't make amends to the one person who mattered most. Until now." Then Dr. Phil turned to Sarah. "And you? You've been carrying this rage, this hatred, for 15 years. You said you wanted to forgive but didn't know how. Now you know who. The question is, can you?" Sarah looked at Michael, really looked at him. Saw the decade of sobriety. Saw the genuine remorse. Saw a man who had been destroyed by his own actions and spent every day since trying to be better. "I can't say I forgive you," Sarah said finally. "Not today. Maybe not ever completely. But I can say this, I see that you're sorry. I see that you've changed. And I don't want to carry this hatred anymore. It's too heavy." Dr. Phil stood and addressed the camera directly, even though the tape was supposedly stopped. "This is why I do this show. Not for ratings. Not for entertainment. But for moments like this. Moments when two human beings find each other in their darkest pain and choose connection over hatred. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The taping resumed officially, but something fundamental had changed. Dr. Phil arranged for Sarah and Michael to meet with a counselor specializing in restorative justice. He connected them with a support group for families affected by drunk driving, and with a group for people living with the guilt of causing harm while under the influence. 3 months later, Sarah sent Dr. Phil a letter. In it, she explained that she and Michael had met 4 more times with the counselor. She wasn't ready to call him a friend. Maybe she never would be. But she no longer woke up every morning consumed by hatred. Michael sent a letter too. He'd started speaking at high schools about drunk driving. He carried Emma's photograph with him everywhere. Before every speech, he looked at that little girl in the yellow dress and reminded himself why his sobriety mattered. The photograph, that faded, creased photograph of a 7-year-old girl with pigtails and an ice cream cone, had become a bridge between two people who thought they could never be in the same room together. The episode aired 6 weeks later. Dr. Phil insisted on including the moment when he stopped the tape. He wanted viewers to understand that some moments were too important for television protocol. That sometimes the cameras needed to stop so the healing could begin. The response was overwhelming. The show received over 100,000 messages. Families of drunk driving victims reached out. People struggling with guilt and addiction reached out. The episode was nominated for an Emmy. But more importantly, it changed how people thought about forgiveness and redemption. In his closing remarks for the episode, Dr. Phil looked directly into the camera and said something that would become one of his most quoted statements. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about refusing to let what happened continue to hurt you." Sarah didn't forgive Michael because he deserved it. She forgave him because she deserved peace. 1 year after the taping, Sarah and Michael appeared on the show together again. This time, they walked out holding hands. Sarah had started a foundation in Emma's name providing scholarships to children who lost parents to drunk driving. Michael worked full-time for the foundation, speaking at schools and raising money. They showed Dr. Phil something during that follow-up appearance. It was a bracelet Sarah now wore every day. It had 2 charms. One was a tiny photograph of Emma, and the other was a sobriety chip, Michael's 10-year chip, which he'd given to Sarah during one of their counseling sessions. "That photograph brought us together," Sarah explained. "But this bracelet keeps us connected. It reminds me that Emma's death wasn't meaningless. Something good came from something terrible." Dr. Phil held that bracelet in his hands, and for a moment, his professional composure cracked. "In 25 years of doing this show," he said, his voice thick, "I have never seen 2 people take their darkest moment and transform it into something this beautiful." The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Dr. Phil stood with them, applauding, honoring the courage it took to walk this impossible journey. That photograph, now preserved in a frame in Sarah's living room, became more than just a memory of Emma. It became a symbol of the possibility that exists when two broken people choose healing over hatred. When someone who has caused unspeakable harm chooses to make amends rather than hide. When someone who has suffered unspeakable loss chooses to see the humanity in the person who caused their pain. Dr. Phil often tells this story at speaking engagements. He calls it the photograph that changed everything. He explains that his job isn't to judge or condemn. It's to create the space where impossible conversations can happen. Where forgiveness, real, painful, complicated forgiveness, can take root. I didn't orchestrate that moment, Dr. Phil says. I just recognized it when I saw it. And I trusted that if I brought two people together who needed each other, even if they didn't know they needed each other, something extraordinary could happen. And it did. Because sometimes the universe puts exactly the right people in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And sometimes it takes 25 years of experience to recognize that moment and have the courage to stop the cameras and let it unfold.